Blade, the stellaron hunter with an 8 billion credit bounty, almost half the amount you need to spend to guarantee summoning for him, is finally being released as part of the first 1.2 banner. And I suppose the biggest question is he any good? Generally, the answer is yes. Thanks for watching the video. No, hold on. Blade is a pretty good DPS, but his playstyle may be a thing of preference, and depending on what type of playstyle you like, you may not enjoy the way his kit functions, even if he can potentially do a lot of damage. So in this video, let's unpack Blade. What can he do and what's different about his playstyle? Before we dive headfirst into Blade, if you want to see more Honkai style content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Now, what exactly can Blade do? Blade is functionally a destruction wind DPS, and a lot of his kit has built-in mechanics that consumes his own HP. His skill is an enhanced type ability that, when activated, consumes 30% of Blade's own HP and modifies his basic attack to deal increased damage. The skill itself does not generate any energy, and after using it, it doesn't take up Blade's turn, allowing him to use the enhanced attack immediately. He stays in this modified state for about 3 turns. His ultimate also has some of those mechanics that function around draining his HP further. When activated, it sets his HP to 50% of its max value. This means that no matter how much HP you have, whether it's 20% or 100%, immediately after activating his ultimate, his HP will go to 50%. Unlike his skill though, the damage you deal is scaled against a percentage of his max HP, as well as the total HP that Blade has lost throughout the entire fight. So the more HP Blade has, and the more HP he lost throughout the fight, the more damage his ult does, although the damage from HP loss caps out at about 90% of his max HP. The ultimate deals damage to a main target and slightly lower damage to the adjacent targets and still retains the HP scaling values. Each time Blade takes damage or consumes his HP from either his skill or ultimate, he gains a stack of charge thanks to his talent. At the maximum stack of 5, Blade will immediately carry out an AoE follow-up attack that does damage based on his attack and max HP. Each time this triggers, Blade also heals himself for 25% of his max HP. This kit makes Blade a somewhat very high risk, high reward type character that will have their HP fluctuate quite wildly throughout the fight. Some of his Ascension talents do alleviate this risk a little bit by giving him some self-healing and increasing the healing he receives. So what benefits can you expect to get from this sword maniac who clearly seems like he needs a day off? Firstly, his scaling doesn't seem to be too crazy at level 10 skill levels, but because his damage is supplemented by HP loss to some degree, it's likely he can still do pretty good damage. Being a destruction character also means that he has a nice middle ground of functionality, being able to hit multiple targets unlike a hunt character, but at the same time doing more damage than a typical erudition character. So if he is your first 5-star DPS, he can somewhat deal with both single target and AoE situations at the same time, making him sort of slot efficient. On top of that, most of his damage will come from his enhanced basic attack, which likely means that you don't need too many skill points since the skill lasts for 3 turns. Aside from that, because his kit functions around losing HP, Blade typically wants to be hit. Usually, this isn't a good thing for most other characters, but since Blade does benefit from this, attracting some damage his way means that he can reduce the damage going to your other squishier characters, but at the same time still benefiting from it. As he gets hit more and more, he buffs and ults and eventually triggers his talent as well, which gives him a bit of sustain in the form of a self-heal, but also means you have an off-turn attack, almost like a slightly more delayed counter. All this essentially amounts to a pretty good destruction wind DPS, the only 5-star one we have at the moment by the way, who will likely be a pretty good addition to your team in general. Before you go ahead and dump all your savings though, there is a big caveat here and some negatives that you should consider. The first is that his playstyle is that of a berserker class, sacrificing HP to essentially do damage. Practically every move he makes will consume HP in some way and will ensure his HP fluctuates throughout the fight. Because of this, while he does do respectable damage, Blade can be in a precarious situation throughout the fight if you're not planning it carefully, and one unlucky attack by a boss monster or something and he might just die prematurely. Now, typically, you'd bring characters to sustain your team like healers or preservation characters that can taunt or shield, but due to his kit, Blade only really functions well with healers. You see, because Blade wants to get hit, take damage, and lose some HP, shielders work pretty negatively with him. Now, I'm not sure if some of his kit will trigger on hit, but in general, you'd want to avoid bringing shielders like March and Japard alongside Blade. On top of that, you can't really pair him with characters that taunt the enemy, like the fire main character, Clara, or even Ting Yun, as again, attacks not hitting him reduces his overall efficiency. Right now, the only healer that has a good synergy with him is Luocha, but that's not to say someone like Natasha can't function with him though. Lynx is also coming out in the future and she has skills that buffs max HP, so it seems that Blade is built to stand alongside Abundance rather than Preservation characters. So overall, I think Blade is a pretty good DPS as long as you are okay with him being in somewhat constant danger. Some of you won't mind this at all, but I know the rest of you might be like me and are too cautious for your own good, and seeing him at 30% HP one moment and 70% the next is just gonna stress you out. Another thing to consider is the characters we know coming out in the next 3 banners, which are Kafka, Imbibitor Lune, and Fu Xuan. All 3 of them are pretty unique in their own right, and you might want to consider if these characters benefit your team more. Of course, if you want to summon Blade purely for aesthetic reasons or you just like his story or lore, then by all means splurge away. Though you should spend responsibly. I think if you can get past his berserker playstyle, which isn't bad but definitely an acquired taste, and you aren't interested in the upcoming characters, he's probably a good character overall to consider and will likely do some good damage as the only 5-star win DPS we have right now. But I'll leave that decision to you, and if you decide to summon for him, good luck with your summons. That does it for this video. If I missed out something, do point it out in the comments, and if it's been helpful, consider liking and subscribing to the channel as well. Thank you for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.